and an interesting group of panelists. And it's very open-ended session we're going to have. Sort of in the spirit of yesterday, where there was things were dealt with in a very open-ended way, and the discussion was allowed to flow. So I'm going to minimize my intros even, except to say we have, okay, in order of appearance, I had figured this out, and it was Kealani, Dr. Kealani Cook from West Oahu is going to lead off, and then Dr. Ron Johnson, who has written widely about subjects of the kingdom, and then the overthrow, and then the post. And then we will have Vina Lanzona and Elyssa Santos. And there is a kind of slight time progression built into this relative to 1898, which is our organizing theme, right? Kealani, I've asked, he's written a terrific book about Hawaii from the standpoint of the kingdom and Polynesia, and in the process he delved very deeply into the nature of contact, and I've asked him to lead off with that, if he would, and then we'll have a little progression through time, but we're going to keep this simple and freewheeling, and think about your questions as we go.
Okay. Mahalo, Tom. Mahalo, everyone, for being here. Yeah, I'll just jump right into it. So, when we think of Hawaii, our tendency, especially when it's routed around something like 1898, our tendency is to think of outside relationships, specifically through empire, our outside relationships with the US. But one of the things that we can sort of do to rethink that relationship and sort of almost denaturalize it, it is our norm now when we think of outside relationships, to think of the US. But one of the things we can do is look at what our relationships with the rest of the world were like previous to that. Lorenz Gonchar has done a bunch of work on this, so has David Chang. And one of the things we can look at is our relationship to the idea of kahiki. Kahiki, Tahiti, it does become, by the time, definitely by the 1850s, 1860s and earlier, kahiki becomes the catch-all term for down south, right? Kahiki, Tahiti, and it's almost similar to now when people talk about going to anywhere in like the Society Islands. They're like, oh yeah, we went down to Tahiti. Where? Right, yeah, well, different island, but we default. And kind of the same idea. So kahiki was, when you look through Mo'olelo, I mean, there's all of these Mo'olelo that talk about going to Kahiki, coming back from Kahiki. There's the La'amai Kahiki stuff, La'amai Kahiki. There's Hili and Paea, there's Pele, right? Sort of like the Pele coming to Hawaii and Pele's family coming to Hawaii. So we have a understanding of long-term ties and connections to Kahiki. 19th century, there is a period of no travel, and let the archaeologists argue about how long that is, but there's a period where we're not going back and forth, because at a certain point, we have enough here that traveling back and forth, the expense in terms of resources and the danger maybe doesn't add up to the potential benefits. But the memory is still there. Kahiki is still there, it's still in names, it's still in Mo'olelo. And then in the 19th century, we see one of the first things, like Kanaka really quickly being like, oh, you guys are going to Tahiti. That sounds a lot like Tahiti, jumping on a ship and going. So there is that movement there. And then in the 1900s, you do see efforts to use those ties to Kahiki in different, like, specific ways to benefit or better understand things here in Hawaii. Kalakaua does create an embassy, or not embassy, a diplomatic legation to go down to Samoa. It's supposed to go to Samoa and Tonga, and the idea being together, these last three major independent kingdoms could potentially fend off empire. We have recognition, they don't have recognition, but together we have numbers. And basically it's harder to eat three things off of the table than eat one thing, and one thing. So there is this legation, there is this effort to see Kahiki as a place where we could connect to retie, rekindle those relationships. There's a lot of youth, John E. Bush, who's Hapa dude, is in charge of the legation, and he uses a lot of language of genealogy and connection and tie with the Samoans, especially with Maliatoa and Mata'afa, to create those ties, to create those connections. So Kahiki is there. One of the things, and I'm gonna go a little bit past my time point, when we think of 1887, a little bit, 1892 for sure, and 1898, absolutely. Those moments reshape that view of the Pacific. And it reshapes our view of where we look to. Because between, just the realities of dealing with an empire, the realities of language being crushed, it's going to reshape how we look at the Pacific. We have fewer options of explicitly thinking and looking at the Pacific as a nation state, right? That's kind of wiped away from memory. There's all of these ways that 1898 is going to reshape things. If you look at the Filipino-Hawaiian relationship, what does that relationship look like without 1898? Or if the US actually was the giant anti-imperial force that it claims right up into the war, what happens if there's an independent Philippines and an independent Hawaii in 1900? What does that relationship look like? There's incredible potential for something like that. There's already some ties and connections. Negative potential is always there. If there's one thing humanity has proved, it's like we're always have the negative potential to be really crappy. But there's also all these positive or just potential futures that are wiped. So that's kind of 1898. And then thinking forward again to how do we rethink those relationships and help reform those relationships in the modern day. That's already happening. There's already all these connections and ties to other parts of the Pacific, and like a broader Pacific, to Okinawa, to the Philippines, etc., and activist work. But these are all mostly still done within this lens of empire. How are we fighting against, specifically, like we mostly focus on how do we fight this one empire, but is there a different way? Is there a way to rethink our connections to Kahiki, explicitly keeping in mind that 1898 is screwing with those, and rethink those and reshape those? And I have no idea, because I'm an historian, so I mostly look at the past.
Right, I don't know if this cord is going to reach. When it come over there? Yeah. Kealani challenges how we think about 1898 for sure. And when I read his book, I thought, boy, he doesn't fit into 1898. And then I thought, this is not about fitting people into 1898, but stretching our minds. And So I'm very appreciative of your presentation. I've heard a couple of those now. This is Ron Williams. Okay.
Aloha mai kākou.
Aloha.
O wau Ron Williams Jr. E akawika wau I ka waihona palapala au pori o ka mupo aia Hawaii. He malahini wau I ke aina o Hawaii no laila e ho'omaka wau I ku'u mo'u kuaha. So I'm going to start with my genealogy. I'll make it short. My academic and my maternal or my familial genealogy. My mother's Janet Marie LaBounty. She comes from Chicago, Illinois, which is where I was born. Her people come from Quebec, and before that, France, Ireland, and Wales. My father is Ronald Williams Sr., Big Ron. My dad is a farmer. He's in Arkansas, where I grew up. His family comes from a long line of farmers in the South. On the other end of my genealogy is my wonderful daughter, Kealani Williams, who now has 2 kids. I have 2 mo'opuna, Nanea and Kamahala. So that's who I am in that sense. Academically, I went to school in 1984 at BYU, Provo, Utah. I took 3 semesters of courses, probably 18 or 19 courses, and I passed 2 of them. So we both agreed I should go home. I came back to school here at Kealani in 2003, I believe. And I got my BA in Hawaiian Studies from this center, and my MA in Pacific Island Studies, and my PhD in Hawaiian History. So that's who I am. What I was thinking about today, when they offered the topic of history, past, present, and future, it so resonated with me because to me that's all about historiography. That's all about public histories, right? Not only how people produce histories, but how people ingest histories, right? And what happens because of that ingestion. And as a public historian, I've been able to experience that out in the community. And it's not only moving, it's mind-blowing. Kanaka Oiwi are undoubtedly connected to their past and to the future. My first kumu, Akoni Akana, from Friends of Moku'ula, he coined that phrase, Ikawama Mua Kawama Hope. Yeah? People call it a Olono'ia, but it was actually created in the 80s by him. And it's that idea of in the future is the past. I want to play a 30-second clip of audio for you that I was listening to last night that kind of, it's a former kumu of mine who says it, of course, much better than I could have, and so hopefully this will work.
That's a good way to say it, because that's what political power is. It's giving your voice a platform from which to make political historical change. You can't just be, see, and that's the thing about writing. Writing is a form of voice, which is a form of power. So I think that, that historical records are...
So, Dr. Hana, if you try to ask and talking about the idea of production of voice from Kanaka. Sorry. And another kumu of mine, Noe Silva, is a prime example of that. Producing material that claims space on the landscape, on the physical and the mental landscape. Yeah. As far as that stretching between those boundaries of past, present, future, I have an example I can tell you about. I gave a talk in Hilo about 3 years ago. Part of my research currently is working on a book about 1895, and not the rebellion, but the prisoners. What happened to the prisoners? There were 189 men who were arrested, quote, on the battlefield, but there were 400 men and 7 women total who were arrested afterwards, right? And basically went out and arrested all the top Hawaiians around the island. I came across some of the photos, some of the booking photos of those prisoners. Not a lot of them are missing, but I came across a few dozen, and I started to match them up with the accounts and so forth. I went to Hilo to give a talk, and I was thinking about talking on this, and I battled back and forth forever about whether or not I should show these photos and so forth. And so I got up and I finished my talk and I ran them as a slideshow, just quietly with the thing. And in the front row was a friend of mine, Kealani Wilson, and his wife, and she was bawling. And I said, oh God, see, I knew I shouldn't have done this, I felt horrible. And I went up to talk to her, and she said something that encompasses this whole topic for me. I said, I'm so sorry. And she said, no, I'm glad you showed them. She said, that second to last slide you showed was my great-grandfather. She said, and, this is the part that connects it. She said, and I realized that was the first generation of my family in prison. Yeah. So that idea of intergenerational trauma there's a prime example of it, right? This history of Hawaii from 150 years ago that's today directly affecting these Kanaka women, right? So things like that continue to reverberate in the work. When I gave a presentation at Waiоla Church in Lahaina, the Church of Kealani, first Christian church on Maui, when I gave a talk there on my dissertation, which kind of focuses on that church, I'll never forget, I finished, and Uncle Les Kulaloyo stood up, Kuna stood up, and he said something along the lines of, thank you for this. These are things we always knew in our na'au, but we didn't have the words for, right? The facts, the production of material, the story, all those things, but they knew, right? And so I think that what we do as historians, hopefully, is reconnect Kanaka Oiwi and to these stories, to their stories, right? And that's a humbling thing. But as far as past, present, and future, the catalog of the exhibit we're talking about today, I don't know if we are talking about that or not, but I wanted to mention that as another example, right? And I can do this, I think. The curators for the exhibit came to the State Archives about 4 years ago, and they said they were going to do this project. And I sat with them and talked to them for a couple of hours. And I gave them my mana'o of the fact that go speak to this person, go speak to Noinoi Silva, go speak to John Osorio, go speak, access Hawaiian language sources. Well, for 4 hours we talked. They came in the next day and did research for about an hour and a half, and they left, and I didn't see them again. This is about, I got an email on a Thursday from them that said, we finished up our narrative. I was like, oh, wow, who wrote it? And so they said, we finished up our narrative, can we hire you to go over it and proof it? And I thought to myself, no way. But then I thought, well, if I don't proof it, it's gonna be worse and horrible, right? So I looked at it, and I've never done this before on a job. I've never, ever done this before. I wrote her back and I said, I can't fix this. It's that problematic. They had gone back to those tropes from the 70s and 80s. They'd taken away Native agency in my completely in this thing. And so you have this example of curators from the National Gallery of National Portrait Gallery, like having the confidence to write as a historian on a topic that they're 7,000 miles from. So we're still in the thick of past, present, and future production of historical voice.
Ron makes me want to start talking, but I'm going to try to bite my tongue because Vina is one of our conveners, and she takes us to a different place, but a very related place. And I want to say that she has written one of the most brilliant books that is, come out of Hawaii, let's say, which is called The Amazons of the Huck Rebellion. She got inside the villages of Luzon, which produced the Huck Rebellion, and got acquainted with all the women who were behind it, and wrote about the revolution in the Philippines from that point of view. And I made her acquaintance in the last while as we're kind of wrapping this thing up, and it's one of the rewards of doing this work.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's a plug for our afternoon session on women in history. But for now, this is our session on history, and I think we have a very difficult task of trying to connect the past, present, and the future. So I'll try to do that, especially in a place like the Philippines, which I'm sure many of you know has a very complex history. But let me start with, I have a prop today. I borrowed this picture of Jose Rizal. If you guys don't know, but if you're from Hawaii or familiar with Philippine history, you know that this is our national hero, Jose Rizal, the great author and novelist. So between 1889 and 1890, this period we're talking about, our national hero, Jose Rizal, wrote an essay entitled Filipinas dentro de 100 años, which has been commonly translated as The Philippines a Century Hence. It is important to note that he wrote this essay 6 years before the first Filipino national revolution against Spain, which eventually led to his execution by the Spanish on December 30, 1896 at 35 years old. He wrote this essay towards the end of the 19th century and at the dawn of a new century, reflecting on where the Philippines was headed. He starts with this quote. It's all in Spanish, of course, but I'm translating. In order to read the destiny of a people, it is necessary to open the book of its past, and this, for the Philippines, may be reduced in general terms to what follows. So he tries to give us a history. He then describes the Philippines after 300 years of colonial rule. The Philippines were depopulated, impoverished, and retarded, caught in their metamorphosis without confidence in their past, without faith in their present, and with no fond hope for the years to come. And this is actually what he thought was the period right before the Spanish came. And then the Spanish arrived, then began a new era for the Filipinos. They gradually lost their ancient traditions, their recollections. They forgot their writings, their songs, their poetry, their laws, in order to learn by heart other doctrines which they did not understand, other ethics, other tastes, different from those inspired in their race by their climate and their way of thinking. Then there was a falling off, he said. They were lowered in their own eyes. They became ashamed of what was distinctively their own. In order to admire and praise what was foreign and incomprehensible, their spirit was broken and they acquiesced. Thus years and centuries rolled on, he wrote, as he reflected on how the Philippines was transformed and violated by the process of the so-called Hispanization. He ends the first part of his essay. Such is an outline of the past. We know their present. Now what will their future be? Will the Philippine Islands continue to be a Spanish colony? And if so, what kind of colony? Will they become a province of Spain, with or without autonomy? And to reach this stage, what kind of sacrifices will have to be made? Will they be separated from the mother country to live independently, to fall into the hands of other nations, or to ally themselves with neighboring powers? He, of course, remarks, it is impossible to reply to these questions. But then he persisted to ask the same questions. So it's good to think about somebody actually thinking about the 19th century or the beginning of the new century, right? What will become of the Philippines within a century? Will they continue to be a Spanish colony? He spends a lot of time thinking about various scenarios of what would happen if they remain under the Spanish, and then continues to think about the future of the Philippines. He writes, if the Philippines secure their independence after heroic and stubborn conflicts, he said, they can rest assured that neither England, nor Germany, nor France, and still less Holland will dare to take up what Spain has been unable to hold. Then he also discounted the Asian empires of Japan and China of having any interest in taking over the Philippines. But finally he writes, perhaps the great American Republic, whose interests lie in the Pacific and who has no hand in the spoliation of Africa, may someday dream of foreign possession. This is not impossible, for the example is contagious. Covetousness and ambition are among the strongest vices, and he meant President Benjamin Harrison, manifested something of this sort in the Samoan question. But the Panama Canal is not open, nor the territory of the states congested with inhabitants, and in case she should openly attempt it, the European powers would not allow her to proceed, for they know very well that the appetite is sharpened by the first bites. North America would be quite a troublesome rival if he should once get into the business. Furthermore, this is contrary to her traditions. So this is Jose Rizal writing in 1890s. He gave us two concluding sentiments in this essay. To Spain, he appeals for the Filipinos. As he said, Spain must someday tell Filipinas that thou hast no ear for her woes, and that if she wishes to be saved, she must redeem herself. For the Filipinos, he states, very likely the Philippines will defend with inexpressible valor the liberty secured at the price of so much blood and sacrifice, which of course he was right, because it came 6 years after he wrote this essay. But this essay is just so interesting, primarily because of how Rizal ponders the future of the Philippines. He was obviously a very keen observer of what's happening, not just in Asia, but also in the Pacific and the world. And this essay reveals what he thought of the US, of America. He even knew its president, then Benjamin Harrison, who established Samoa as an American protectorate with Germany and England as partners, who also tried to annex Hawaii but failed. How true or false has Rizal been about America and its relationship to the Philippines? He was wrong about America's interest in Asia, for one, which seemed a natural expansion of its interest in the Pacific. He never saw America as interested in the Philippines. Why? Maybe because it was so far away, and also European colonial governments were at the height of their powers that they would not have allowed the US to have a presence outside of its own insular scope. He was wrong about occupation and colonization as being contrary to its traditions. Rizal shared what many Filipinos felt about the US, especially after its 1896 revolution against Spain, and after it declared its own independent republic, the Philippines, on June 12, 1898. Like Rizal, the Filipino revolutionaries also believed that the US will support their desires for independence because of its own democratic institutions. Yeah, right. But they, like Rizal, were wrong. The US only saw them as children and savages unfit for self-rule, trapped in the feudal, backward traditions of Spain. The Philippines needed the US to teach them democracy through forced and violent assimilation. And that was what we witnessed in our history. The Filipinos understood this right away in 1898, when the Spanish and the US fought a mock battle in Manila, and the Spanish surrendered to the US and not to the Filipinos. When the Spanish and the US signed the Treaty of Paris with no Filipino representation, a treaty of surrender where the US bought the Philippines for $20 million. Not soon after this treaty, the Filipinos fought for their independence against the US, a war that lasted for more than 10 years but officially declared finished in 1902. This war ended with about 500,000 Filipinos dead. A Filipino government was depleted and defeated and capitulated to the US. So these realities escape Rizal, who died 2 years before, who did not foresee two things when he wrote the essay. First, a Filipino revolution against Spain, although he understood that this seemed inevitable at that time, and a rising US imperial power. For the latter, Rizal and other Filipinos were wrong to misjudge US interests in the Philippines, but they were also right. They were right to see the US as a major player, one who was menacing and could not be trusted. The US hid behind false assertions of respect for sovereignty and democracy to carry out occupation. They hid behind false acts of benevolence, making their occupied peoples believe that they needed them when they only promoted their self and imperial interests. They have been fooling or convincing Filipinos, or more accurately, tried to fool Filipinos from the 1890s, which culminated in 1898, leading to more than 50 years of occupation, characterized by elite democracy, a Philippine economy dependent on the US and catered to the US market, and the promotion of English and American culture. Famously, Filipinos were miseducated, the revolutionary leaders co-opted, they became impoverished and landless, and they lost their identity. I'm almost done. World War II also saw a betrayal of the US, who initially left the Filipinos at the mercy of the Japanese. US influence heightened during the Cold War with the US-sponsored neo-colonial government that punished leftist organizations and led to practices of surveillance and repression. It culminated in the 1970s when the US supported the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos and the imposition of martial law in the Philippines. And this control and power over Filipino politics and culture continue until the present. So now in the 21st century, more than 100 years since Rizal asked, we pose the same title, The Philippines a Century, or more accurately 125 years hence, and ask the same questions. What will become of the Philippines? What will the future be? I want to end with a bit more optimism than Rizal and think of answers that did not depend on the benevolence of a colonial or foreign government, but on the Filipinos themselves. I want to, but it's incredibly difficult with the continued legacies of colonialism and authoritarianism. But as we have seen from yesterday's sessions, the hope lies in grassroots movements and struggles in solidarity with many other movements from different generations. And I have every hope that Filipinos would always be fighting and struggling just like what they did 125 years ago. Thank you.
Elyssa, could you describe a little bit the breadth of all the things you're working on at your home before you start? Just because this is so remarkable in terms of archives, in terms of going out to all the military bases and the breadth of it.
Okay, so I guess a quick introduction. First of all, happy day, everybody. My name is Elyssa Santos. I'm from the island of Guahan, in the Laguas Zambani Islands, you might also know it as the Mariana Islands. And I guess Craig has wanted me to mention a couple of the spaces that I operated in my previous employers before I came out here for grad school. That included teaching in the history department at the University of Guam, working for the Chamorro Language Commission, which is the authority on Chamorro language back home, as well as the authority on Chamorro place names, as well as the Guam Cultural Repository, which is funded by the Department of Defense, but is the brand spanking new space that we are to house several collections, to include those on the military base that have been disturbed because of the ongoing military construction and military buildup, as well as those that have been stored in inadequate spaces under the Guam Museum for a backlog of over 20 years. So we have like three, buildings. A building of 3 stories with our ancestors' bones and other material culture, basically stacked from top to bottom and floor to ceiling. And interestingly, in Hawaiian lei boxes, so not even adequate, archival boxes for our ancestors. So just a quick overview. Today, I know I was asked to speak on Guam and Micronesian folks because of some other projects that I'm engaged in, but I think I just really want to focus in on the 1898 event and share some perspectives and insights as someone who is a product of the history department back home. I did my BA in history at the University of Guam. Later, after getting my master's here, I went into the classroom and taught as an adjunct for a bit, and then I'm now back in my first year of my PhD program in history. So kind of looking at the discipline and critiquing it as we study what that looks like under empire. Right? We do history from within the belly of the beast. For some historical context first, though, I'm not sure if folks are as familiar with 1898 and how that sort of played out in Guahan and the Marianas, or the legacy of that. So I'd just like to start there. In the dominant narrative, 1898 is really, or the Spanish-American War, is really seen as sort of a comical event. I know a bunch of us have been critiquing the articulation of that as the splendid little war. In Guahan, it's a comical event, it's a benign event with humorous characters and situations, because the Spanish colonial officials there were caught off guard, and so were the Chamorros. And so the ways in which Chamorros are portrayed and our colonial officials are portrayed is just totally being unprepared and unaware that there was actually a war going on between the United States and Spain. And so it's one that's definitely oversimplified, and one that dismisses the experiences of our ancestors who were running in the bushes, fleeing into the churches, very fearful of what was going on. And there was definitely a lot of uncertainty at the time. But they happened to be portrayed right in the dominant narrative as just being, immediately, overnight, happy that with the U.S. presence, and they also expressed their allegiance right away, to the new colonizer. So in Guahan, we have to really combat that narrative. Sharing our ancestors' experiences, some documents of their experiences shared by priests, but also really talking about the legacies of 1898. For us, what we see is a dismemberment, right, of Guahan from our sister islands. So Guahan is the largest southernmost island, and then the Northern Mariana Islands, today known as the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, make up the northern islands. And so that legacy, right, continues to affect us today, not just politically, but how we share our stories, how we relate to one another, and how we try to heal from those traumas. And so I'm thinking about, again, how we do history in the Marianas, how we do history under empire. Back home, the history department is not a safe space. With the exception of the classroom of my mentor, Ampere Satori, she's the only Tomoro in the department. She's been holding it down for years, and she's also the only woman in the department who may retire within 4 to 5 years. That's the dynamic back home. It's a discipline or a field that is predominantly filled by white male professors who are teaching Asian history, Pacific history, and Guam history. So outside of her classroom, where we are empowered to learn about topics like colonization, decolonization, and empire, right? Decolonization is a dirty word. I've been discouraged as a student to engage in that topic, being told by my professors that it's only a phase that will eventually pass. I've been discouraged from conducting gendered analysis of history. I've had white male professors come into the classroom, disrupting that of my Tomorrow teachers and passing out flyers and pamphlets to convey a point that Guam is American soil. And I think too, settler scholars back home also focus a lot on change and continuity, and I know that is an analytic that we use in history, but it's interesting how that's employed. It's used in a way where we depoliticize history, how they depoliticize history. So if we're talking about, for example, the evolutions of Chamorro music, it's just, let's talk about Chamorro musical sensibilities, but let's not mention that Chamorro music, the creation of that, right, was an act of resistance. Or the continuity of that was an act of resistance. So that is sort of the experience that I had back home. That's why I identify as a recovering historian. And then coming here...
Now you're in a safe space there.
Well, in the history department,
department.
Yeah. I have to say though, it differs amongst the fields. In Pacific history, and thank goodness, for our professors there, Dr. Joseph Facona, who also happens to be here, thank you, Doc, providing those spaces where we can unpack these topics. He may have stepped out. I think I wanted to talk about world history in particular, those of us in that field, because that is another space in which we unpack empire. Tom asked us to talk about terms and trends, and as historiographers, we love to engage in that topic. We love to learn about the history of terms and approaches. In world history, I think something that I'm kind of flagging and wanting to be critical of is this sort of fixation on the terminology, though. We are constantly unpacking these globally embracing terms: empire, transnationalism, nationalism, decolonization. We get so fixated sometimes on how to define it. And with empire in particular, it's just like, what qualifies it, right? It's just such a messy term. Can we even study it? I'm often finding myself in spaces where we're asked, does empire exist? Is the US even an empire? That's today in 2024. And as a student from a colony, I'm looking at my colleagues and I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah. It certainly exists for those of us who still live in those colonialities. And so that space sometimes continues to be a space where we don't think about Kuleana-informed research. There's definitely a cognitive dissonance where we're not even thinking about Hawaii, where we are, or engaging in Hawaiian scholarship, and thinking of our responsibilities to do that as many of us as settlers here and settlers in the department. So those are my critiques of the spaces that I've operated in, but going back to the question of like, how do we do history in the Marianas? With those doings being said, now that you know the situation, my response to that is, well, we have to just blur those boundaries and disrupt those narratives. So if I'm forced and our people are forced to do history in a way that's very insular, as if Guam history and CNMI history are two separate things, then we will think archipelagically, we will write archipelagically. And how that manifests in my work includes, I do a lot of place names research, and oftentimes that requires a lot of collaboration with folks in the Northern Marianas who are also trying to look at place names revitalization as a way to combat colonial remapping or colonial mapping, as well as militarization. In a Kantan Samarita project, which is the singing art form of my people, and actually the method through which we tell stories, it also is a space through which we can debate and fact check one another. That again requires this sort of pan-Marianas, pan-archipelago engagement, because it's tunes that are known throughout the archipelago, and there are master singers throughout the archipelago that must be acknowledged and who have their stories to tell. And lastly, through this recent repatriation effort of laddie stones, we're working with the Bishop Museum right now to send our stone megaliths home along with other material culture back home, other ancestors. And that cannot be a Guam-centric conversation. It has to be something we do with our brothers and sisters in the Northern Marianas, because they belong to all of us. So I'm just thinking of ways we are trying to do history in those ways in spaces beyond the institution, but not just with our own people, with Filipinos and Micronesians and Kanaka. I'm here to just prop up the work of Filipinx scholars in Guahan, helping to mine those histories, the Micronesian communities who are helping to revitalize seafaring, schools that are spaces through which the oral histories of how our ancestors migrated to each other's homes and exchanged knowledge are actually living in practice. And then with Kanaka, I'm hoping to do that through my work, my dissertation proposal, which looks at archives in Guahan, Hawaii, and Michigan, which were Micronesian-owned publications, and those publications serving as textual spaces through which Micronesian editors invited Kanaka, Black scholars, Puerto Rican scholars, Asian scholars to come and contribute at a time when Micronesia was still trying to self-determine, but they were very politically conscious, and I think that history of activism has not been shared. But yeah, all those things to consider, legacies of 1898. Thank you.
Tom, we've moved everything 15 minutes back, so you have a half hour for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Craig. Up to now, our gathering has been something very gratifying, I'd say. And I sit and I listen to the presentations that have been made so far, and I look around the room at all of you who have done such fantastic work. And I'm really frustrated as hell by the very format of the panel. First of all, this panel has so much to say, and I know that those of you in the room have so much to say, or there's questions to raise, and I feel that if we could stay in this room for 3 days, okay. I was going to say a month, but we might get on each other's nerves on the fourth day. I don't know, but that we would be getting more to the bottom of things. But with that interjection, with that outburst, I will just say, who first wants to ask a question or make a point of response? And if nobody does, I'm going to call you out. I'm gonna ask. You want to? Okay.
All right.
Okay. You want to do that?
Tom told us to prepare some questions to the other panelists, but it's
Who wants to talk? Let's keep it close to the ground here I'll get back to you, okay? But Noi or Noilani or there are a whole bunch of people in the room who have come close to reshaping this history, and I wanted. Would you give a response, Noi? First off,
Sure.
Noi Silva. Okay.
I don't know, do I need the mic? Oh, wait. Go get my notes.
She got to get her notes. Okay.
Okay, mahalo. Hello, hi everybody. Okay, so what a fantastic panel. Oh my God. I'll just start with a little anecdote. I'm teaching a class in research in Hawaiian New Pepa this semester. It's an upper division foreign language class, and one of my students went on a little mini lecture the other day about this idea of, Ikava Mamua, Ikava Mahope, and also quoting Lily Kala, we face the future by facing the past. We're back into the future. So we have to know where we've been in order to know where we're going. But then my question back to the student was, right? So how do we actually do that if we can't read what our own ancestors wrote in their own language for 100 years or more? And so I'm really gratified to see and hear this panel with that kind of emphasis, both marking the loss of our knowledge of our history and our native languages as a direct result of American, what do you want to call it, predations on our country, right? So I just applaud all of your work, and thank you for what you're doing. Vina, I don't have I really loved your presentation about Rizal. I know he's such a hero. I don't have the exact reference, but I ran across his name in the Hawaiian language newspapers. So I'm going to go look that up, and I can't wait to read your book too. Ron, I want to talk to you later about what happened with that volume. And so that was really good, at least that they came to you and asked you to do that. When I read the sections on Hawaii, I wasn't completely appalled. So something happened, I think, in between. But thank you for doing that. And then, Elyssa, first of all, I'm sorry that's happened to you in history, but historically, that's what happens, right? And so, but luckily, as you said, Professor Joe Kokona is in the history department now. Monica Labriola is over there. We have a brand new Hawaiian historian, Noah Dolan, and of course, Kealani is writing history from West Oahu. But so we'll change these eventually, and with people like you around, just coming up, these new scholars, it's going to be fantastic. You know, when you take your place in the academy, you know, maybe you'll revolutionize the department at UOG. Yeah, that would be great. Okay, that's my response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind me doing this, Kealani? Can you similarly come and speak? There's no such thing as panelists in this thing, okay?
Mahalo. I'll keep my comments short. I just want to mahalo each of you for everything you shared. One of the themes that I heard, especially in Elyssa and Ron's talks, were that as far as we've come, there's still a whole lot more to do, that there are still very powerful and entrenched white supremacist forces that are shaping the ways that narratives of history are told in the present. And so I think the thing I wanted to add was just an experience that I had recently at a Global History on Indigenous Thought conference at Yale, which was an amazing conference of various people, some of whom will be zooming in for this conference. But contrasted with that, we also got a chance to visit the Peabody Museum, which has a new Pacific collection that's just coming into being that was donated by this white man who had collected all of these ancestors from across Kamoana-Nui and had most of them in his apartment, massive apartment in New York City, and recently, gave them over to the Peabody. And they included things like this beautiful, massive drum from Tonga, all of these fishing implements, weapons, ki'i, like just ancestors of all kinds. And one of the things that we were talking about is the way that Yale is required by NIPRA to repatriate the items to places that are controlled under U.S. empire, but not for the rest of our family in Kamoana-Nui. And so I think that's the thing that I wanted to bring to this space is how, as much as we are impacted by and oppressed by ongoing U.S. empire, how can we also use our position within, the sort of, what is the word? Sorry, it's early Sunday for me. As legible within U.S. empire in some ways to also advocate and be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters of Kamoana-Nui who may not have some of those legal avenues and also some of the avenues within the academy to tell and represent our histories and stories. And then contrasting that, I just wanted to also shout out that there was a beautiful gathering of Pacifica youth that brought together folks from across Kamoana-Nui. There was Hawaiian dancing, Tongan dancing, tinikling to traditional and Bruno Mars music. It was like really cool. And so I think the thing I wanted to throw back to you folks is to ask, what are ways that you think we can reach out to youth, the younger folks who are going to be carrying these histories forward? You've already started to say a little bit about that, but if you had more thoughts on that question.
Why don't you speak to that? Would you? The youngest person here.
Yeah, for me, it's so interesting operating in spaces like this because I'm 30 years old. I'm still like relegated to youth, so no, totally understand.
It's really exciting for all the things she's done at such a young age. Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I know where I fall within the genealogy of historians that have come before me, and what I've learned from them is to obviously always give back and to engage with younger islanders. And so what I'm trying to do with my work specifically, again, being in the TTPI archives, the Trust Territory of the Pacific Archives, is I'm often engaging with archival collections from different island contexts. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of curate or sort of package that in a way where I can share that with island youth. That's my intention right now with Micronesian Connections, the Micronesian student organization on campus that is trying to formalize. And so basically allowing them to be a part of this process, right? I think oftentimes we think of history, and that enterprise, we think of the lone historian looking at dusty archives and there to benefit from that knowledge, right? The publication, what have you. But in a Pacific context, that engagement is communal. And I think if I have the privilege to be in spaces like libraries and archives, that needs to be shared. And the knowledge production that comes out of that needs to be produced partly by the people themselves. And so I get excited to think about what island youth can extract from it, what stories they'll add to it, and what I can learn. Because again, for those of us steeped in also decall work, it's also about practicing a politics of citation. And I want to cite our people and definitely empowered youth. So that's my specific example.
Thank you. I'd like to just say a few words. I'm no longer part of the youth, but sometimes I am kind of disturbed by how the youth see us, who are not youth anymore, and the way that we approach history. And I think it's partly because of, I don't know, maybe their education and the way that they always have this kind of image of a historian, as you said, this lone white guy in the archives. You know, I mean, that is not my experience, obviously, as a historian from the Philippines. You know, I grew up in the Philippines. I went all my way to undergraduate, and it's true. I mean, some Filipinos would probably think I sold out by coming to the U.S. as being a graduate, student here, first in New York, and then went to my PhD in Wisconsin, and then worked in the U.S. So, when in fact most of they encourage Filipinos, of course, to study abroad, but to come back and serve, and work in the Philippines, But I'm not, I'm very hopeful about the state of Philippine history and the fact that it's really quite robust. I mean, we don't have problems in terms of archives. We have so many, probably the pre-colonial period, definitely. That's always been a challenge. But in terms of the Spanish period, the problem is a lot of historians just don't, or a lot of students don't want to learn other languages. I think that's a big issue. So they don't want to learn Spanish anymore. And because of our colonization in the US, and English has become our other lingua franca, so it's English and Filipino. So a lot of people are actually working on the US empire, which is a great thing. And I feel that it is very robust, especially when you think about how Philippine history has gone outside of the national borders, and actually in places like Hawaii and outside of Hawaii, that all these Filipinic scholars have such a big interest about the Philippines, and they've injected much needed energy into Philippine history. So yes, there's still a lot of the vestiges of the global historians who think of the world as Europe, but there's also a lot of work, there's already a lot of work that's been done with younger scholars and historians, and I'm very helpful. I'm hopeful about that.
When Vina talks about that, I'm reminded of when I was in the Philippines, interviewing people from Ateneo University, right? Which is sort of the closest thing to a safe haven. Would you say in the Philippines? The Philippines is a very safe place, but in Ateneo there is a kind of progressive movement and a solidarity, and also a history of sacrifice, and actually the people getting killed. A lot of people got killed at one point.
University of the Philippines.
And UP, okay, University of Philippines. So there are places which have very bravely dealt with the darkness of fascism in the Philippines, as Our Lady last night said. So I found these people who actually sat down with tablets, with a yellow tablet, and wrote out their notes of what they were going to say when they got up into the areas of basically farmers and fishermen, and would gather people. And this particular person, named Christina Montiel, is an amazing person. But she tells the story of gathering people under a tree. So she was a student, and she has her notes, and she shared her notes with me. Gathering people under a tree, and this tank arrives from the national government and advances on them, and comes all the way up, and they all sit there and they continue to talk about oppression and liberation and how they're going to go about it. And the tank person refused to fire. So that's a way of getting, it's a dramatic way of getting young people involved, but I think of it. I have to say for myself, that I'm, not a professor, and I'm not a historian. I'm a journalist who's obsessed with history, and I keep roaming around different aspects of it. But I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of community people as a result, but I've also had an opportunity to talk with a lot of classes of young people, and I have to say that meeting people in the this is an awful thing to say, okay, meeting people in the context of the community is generally a lot more gratifying and a lot more interaction than meeting people in a classroom. And I throw that out in this academic setting to say, how can we stir up classes to get involved in kids' heads? Because I think academia is falling short. Okay, yeah. I don't know any other way to say it.
So first off, thank you, Kealani, for the question. It's a critical question. I'm going to pick on academia again also for a minute and say sometimes I think in academia we overthink things. Dr. Silva and others, through my training have always taught me, trust in the mobile level. They are there. The material is there. It's just us telling those stories. An example I think of is I worked years ago on, I came across the story of John Henry Wise. And here's a gentleman who went to Hilo boarding school, was in the first class at Kamehameha School, Then the missionaries sent him to Oberlin College to study theology. So he was being primed as the Hawaiian who bring Hawaiians back into the churches. And overthrow happens, he comes back, and of course he serves his queen, right? And he ends up going to prison in 1895. He becomes a professor of Hawaiian language at UH. I used to think, wow, how cool would that be to have your professor have been in prison for fighting for the kingdom? But I told that story on a trip I took to Molokai. We talked to the elementary schools, and to tell the kids, I left out the important part, that John Henry Wise was the first native Hawaiian to play college football in America, right? So he had started the football team up at Oberlin. They were pretty horrible until the second year when a gentleman came from the University of Pennsylvania to coach them. He voluntarily coached them. And that gentleman was John Heisman, right, from the Heisman Trophy. And so to tell 3rd and 4th and 5th grade kids on Molokai, here's the first native Hawaiian to play college football in America. His coach was John Heisman, blah, blah, blah. He was also an intellectual. And so I think there's thousands of those stories. It's just trusting that, it's just telling those stories again and again and again. So.
I hate following Ron. A bunch of my career has been coming up with an idea and then reading an article Ron wrote. But yeah, the same answer. The good stories, people react to good stories. We remember good stories. It's hard to remember. I mean, students come in and they're like, I don't remember names and facts, and it's like, yeah, well, what's the plot of your favorite SpongeBob episode that you saw 15 years ago? And they all know it, right? They know a plot. We know stories. That's how we remember things. That's how we work. And if we give solid stories, students respond. Act of War is how old now? 96? Everyone's got mullets in it. It's an old thing. I can still show it to students and it clicks automatically because it is crafted story making. Right? It's a solid moral level. If you have that, students respond. I remember actually being in this classroom and watching it for the first time. But one of these, and the gasps in the room. And it's just because they put together a really good story. It sticks in everyone's mind. Thurston going to Washington, D.C. and like getting approval, right? Moments and stories. We tell stories that click, and then people will be on for the rest. And that's, again, I hate following Ross.
Really?
You know what's really important is, as all of you are creative, I just beg you to go there. Because what our children are missing, and I've been in the trenches, in school, at every level, in orgs and stuff, filming, mural, blah, 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 is we're asking the wrong questions. We're saying, what do you want to do? Honestly, that is not the right question. The right question is, what is your purpose? How do you want to contribute to the community? You know, and those are very different questions, because the young ones that I work with, whether they're in prison or the shelters or whatever, all you got to do is say, hey, you guys are the answer. We have to help you, our generation, to find your purpose, to find your i'ini. I've heard that before today too. Your ono, the thing that you want to spend the rest of your life doing. And I'll tell you something, the arts, they have taken the arts out of school purposefully. They do not want people to be creative. They do not want people to challenge. They do not want people to color out of the box. And I got to tell you, I'd lay my reputation and my life, by the way, on the fact that we as educators and people who care in the community have to figure out a way to bring the arts back in a robust way. Writing, filmmaking, media, any kind of visual arts. Because if you look, that has been taken out of, without music in the schools. Can you imagine? You hear people singing and they can't even hold a tunus because they haven't been schooled enough to even sing a national anthem, our national anthem. So I'm just begging you in this classroom, please understand the critical nature of art, and it's been taken out and sucked away from our kids that people don't even know they're missing something. And it's an important thing for all of you because we're all trying to make a difference with our children, and it's got to be theater, music, dance, visual arts, all of this. It's got to be, because that's the way Maui, our trickster, worked. And anyone who knows about politics and activism, you know, where's Andre? You know that's a huge part of getting into and out of things with a smile on your face and still focus on the prize, so to speak, as in giving our children a future. So without being ridiculous, I will say mahalo to this panel, because this is what people need to hear. You know, and thank you for letting me share. I just really want to thank you.
I want to say, I want to return to my idea of, you know, tearing this whole format up and putting everybody in a great circle and starting over. But like in terms of the resource people, like we have her uncovering, okay, just sitting here, Colin Moore is sitting over there. Until we started this process, I did not know that Colin had written a far-reaching history on how America administered its newly acquired empire. Very enlightening. Keanu Sai, who's sitting right there, I see you. Raise your hand, Keanu. He's hard to miss. Has, in a very controversial way, but he has, is very calm, has more than any single person, I think, advanced and helped us understand the idea that Hawaii is an occupied nation. What a contribution that has been. Noel Kent in the 1970s and 80s wrote because it was a tremendous breakthrough, and it was called provocatively Hawaii Under the Influence, and that was understanding like the network of oppression that had resulted from accumulation of this society. And there's another guy who, I think he's been around a lot, but I think him as youngsters still, because I'm so damn old, was Dean Saranillo, who's in the poli-sci department, and writes very provocatively and extensively about the institutional state of Hawaii and other things. And there are a lot of other people, if we could just unpack everyone. What? Okay, Karen, does that help you with that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I just wanted, Kalamai, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just didn't recognize also Dr. Kosasa. I mean, I worked for a small period of time on a certificate in museum studies, right? Like, we're always going to the archives, as consumers, but how does it work behind the scenes? And she has been, for decades, running that program and teaching students to question museums and so forth, and so I've always appreciated that.
Yes, please.
I wanted to do a public service announcement. Like you mentioned, Active War. Well, in conjunction with Kapolani's Aua at the Home Museum of Art now, which would be, please see it. It's going to be up until September 5th or 7th. But in June, on June 16th at 2 to 4 p.m., we're going to screen Active War. And it's a family day, so it's all free. So it'd be great to bring your family and have everybody there together with conversation. So it will be, story of Drew Broderick and Kelly Cole. There'll be a discussion after the film, but it would be really nice to have everybody there, together, and it's free. So you can go online at the Home Museum of Art, you can register for it, but free. So please come and celebrate this old film that a lot of young people have not seen.
During FestPac, the last day of FestPac, you all know what's happening, right? The 6th to the 16th, the largest gathering of the Pacific, Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia. People, scholars and artists from all over the Pacific. It will be an event. It's never been held in Hawaii for a reason, because nobody's wanted to deal with the United States government. So it's been going ongoing for 50 years, since 1972, and it's really going to be spectacular. So on the subject of PR, that's part of this whole conversation as well. Thank you.
Yesterday, several younger panelists said they got involved with the subject of 1898 because of the observances and scholarship and protests that occurred in 1998. And when I think of 1998, I vividly recall working with Nai, and Nai, is she standing there? Somebody should take a photograph. She's standing there beside reproductions of the, it's sort of a graphic. Move over. Nai studying the petitions against annexation, right? And those, she, struggled with Kealani Minton and a few other people to assemble and bring to us on that day, and people walked up to those panels and ran their hands over them and wept to find their grandparents or their great-grandparents. And in the other person who was on fire in that time, I have to call him out and tell him that he must just talk about recovery of history, because this person has so much to say that he can talk for several days. So, Keanu, can you briefly say hello to everyone and no, come. But come and speak, okay? Because this is enormous. It's time. No, but Keanu, come.
It's not.
What I came by to say was we are still going to have the sanctity of the coffee 15-minute break, so you will be able to get coffee for the next one.
Okay, so Ken is going to wrap it up with 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah, 10:45.
Elyssa.
Hello, everyone. So I met Tom back then, and it was 1998. My Uncle Mel Kalahiki was having meetings at OHA with all the Hawaiian leaders or people who were involved. And he said, Keanu, you and Kaui, my cousin, gotta come and explain about 1898, because it was taking on the idea of a protest. And we said, no, it's actually a celebration. And they were thrown off. And we said, the petition killed the treaty. That should be celebrated. And that's the approach that we took. So we ended up going to Puipao and Joan with the Namakoka. And then we put together a video called We Are Who We Were. We brought that back, and we showed everybody that, and it changed everything. So we started to bring in the idea of state theory, right? Why the country continues to exist despite the overthrow of its government in 1893. That was part of that educational process. And that is an understood principle. So in the case of 2003, when Saddam Hussein's government was overthrown militarily, that didn't mean Iraq ceased to exist. Iraq was an occupied state, right? So we brought those ideas in, and that's why, Kealani, I appreciate when you said, use the term nation state regarding the Hawaiian Kingdom, because what comes with nation state is state theory, which Professor Kanalo Young was promoting in his class in the graduate course. So it's through this idea of state theory that we can kind of look at facts in a way that would interrogate it even more. So one last example to show that. 1893, the leadership of the Hawaiian Patriotic League, who later organized a petition. In 1893, under the leadership of Joseph Navahi, they were referring to what happened in 1893 in their letter to President Cleveland. And they made it specific. They said what occurred in Hawaii in 1893, and they used this word, coup d'état, which is French for foreign invasion, not a coup d'état or revolution. Navahi was an attorney, and they're writing it in English because the audience was the American president. So just those things need to be better understood through this concept, but it takes us back into that time. So I'm a firm believer in that the practical value of history is that it's a film of the past, run through the projector of today onto the screen of tomorrow. That film never changes, but you gotta update the projector. Once you update the projector, you see something you didn't see, I call that Ike. Now within that Ike, what is your kuleana? And I believe in maximizing kuleana. Just be better at what you do, given that film and the process. Is that okay, John?
Okay, thank you everyone, and let's all keep working together and push this forward, okay?